is distance. So if you're talking about the absolute value of a number, it's the distance from 0. If you were to make a number line, it's how many spaces over is it. And distance is always positive, right? Because it doesn't matter if I walk forwards or if I walk backwards. If I walk a mile, I walked a mile. It's the same distance, right? Like I can't unwalk a mile, so I can't do negative distance. Does that make sense? So distance is always positive. So because distance is always positive, absolute value is always positive. So it looks like this. You get two straight lines on either side of a number, and it would be the absolute value of n. That's how you would say that. So this is the absolute value of 4. This is the absolute value of -3. And absolute value is always positive, and since it's distance, if you were to draw a number line and put a number, you'd count spaces. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So absolute value of 4 is 4. -3, 1, 2, 3. Absolute value of -3 is 3. So it doesn't matter what's inside. Whatever comes out is positive. If we have things inside, they act like parentheses. But if I have 2 times 3 minus 8, we would do the parentheses first. So I'd do 2 times -5, and then I would get -10. It's the same thing except we take the absolute value. Now, the difference is if I had 2 times x minus 8. With a parenthesis, I can multiply in, correct? I can distribute. If I have 2 times the absolute value of x minus 8, you can't distribute in. And if you look at it, a parenthesis is like a curve, so I can kind of like slip around it. But absolute value is a wall. So you don't distribute. Distribute has an E on the end, but you don't distribute with absolute value. Okay? Never distribute. Just think of it as a wall. You can't go in. With the parenthesis, you kind of sneak around the curve, but with the absolute value, you're hitting a straight wall. So what you want to do is, this is 2 times the absolute value of 3 minus 8. So what I have to do is I have to take 3 minus 8, then take the absolute value of that, and then multiply it by 2. So 3 minus 8 is -5. The absolute value of -5 is +5, so this is +10. I wish I should have been recording. This can be -40 because the 5 that was outside was negative. So this negative outside, nothing happens to that. It's only what's inside that changes. Right. If you have multiple parts, you do the 2, just like we did when we had 2 sets of parentheses. You have to do the 2 absolute values first. So I do 9 minus 7 is 2, 3 minus 8 is -5. Absolute value of 2 is 2. Absolute value of -5 is +5. So I get 8 plus 5, so 13. Here, negative, double negative, that becomes a positive. So this is 7 plus 2. 5 minus 10 is -5. So 6 times the absolute value of 9. Absolute value of -5 is +5. Absolute value of 9 is just 9. 6 times 9 is 54. So 59. So we just talked about absolute value, right? So absolute value of 7 is 7, and the absolute value of -7 is 7. So if the absolute value of x equals 7, what does that mean? I don't know which one of these that is, right? Because it could be a 7, 7 equals 7, or -7 equals 7. So when this happens, both answers So if the absolute value of x equals 10, what was inside could have been 10 and it could have been negative 10. So that means x equals 10 or negative 10. So you put them both down. If the absolute value of x is 23, x equals 23, and it could also be negative 23. If it's the absolute value of y is 12, it doesn't have to be an x. Y equals 12 or negative 12. What if the absolute value equals negative 2? Remember, we can't, absolute value is positive, right? So if absolute value is positive, we can't have the absolute value equals a negative number. So when that happens, your answer is to say that there is no answer. Because absolute value can never be negative. Does that make sense? Anytime there's a variable inside. Hold on, I'm going to just delete this. So you'll either have 2 or you'll have none. Like this situation where we had none. Now, if there's a negative, just to show you, just so it doesn't, if it comes up, like if it was like this, negative the absolute value of x equals negative 2, that would be okay because this negative out here accounts for this negative here. So that's the same as that. Does that make sense? So we would cancel the two negatives, and then that would mean x equals 2 and negative 2. So if the negative is outside the absolute value, that's okay. But if there's no negative, and then this is negative, there's no solution. Okay, so far? So what we'll do is we solve these the same as a regular equation until the last step. Regular doesn't have an E on the end. That's equation. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to get this absolute value alone. All right, so the first step would be to add or subtract to get that on one side, and the second step is going to be to multiply or divide. So in this case, we want to get rid of this plus 5 first, so I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides because I want that plus 5 to go away, so those will cancel, except it would help if I actually crossed out both of them. Wow, I really can't draw a line today. There. Those cancel. 4 times the absolute value stays. 13 minus 5 is 8. Okay, now I have 4 times the absolute value of x. I don't want to know what 4 times is. I want to know what just 4 is. So I'm going to divide by 4, which will make these two 4s here cancel. So the absolute value of x is equal to 2. So 2 and negative 2. Yeah, so then I have x by itself then is 2 or negative 2. So I get those two answers. Does that make sense? Does the part that do that, so like I said, I went the wrong way. So like I'm trying to make this whole equation here. I'm going to move this so it's out of the way. So in trying to make this get down to this part, I have to do that adding, subtracting, or multiplying and dividing. So order of operations was that we do multiplying and dividing first and then adding and subtracting. So if we're undoing, we do the adding and subtracting first. So because it's plus 4, I want to subtract 4. So whatever this is the opposite always. Yeah. On the page I just gave you? Okay, let me finish this and then we'll do that and then I'll come back to this. So the 4s are going to cancel because I have a positive and a negative. So that leaves on this side 2 times the absolute value of x. And here I have 18 minus 4, so that gives me 14. So 2 times the absolute value of x is 14. So if I want to find out what just the absolute value of x is, I have to divide. So I'm dividing by 2, which makes those go away. So I get the absolute value of x is equal to 7. Now if 7's out here, that means positive or negative 7 was in here, so those are both my answers.
You have to put both of them.
You had to put both, because we don't know which one it was. It could be either one. If I put 7, that's 7, and if I put negative 7, that's also 7. So I don't know which one of these this is, so I have to put both. Absolute value always has 2 or no answers. There's always going to be 2 or none. So you know what to do in this case. Like I've got this 3, here this negative hanging out. Don't automatically say no solution until we've gotten further enough to solve it to know that it's no solution. So I'm going to put a 10, add 10 to both sides. Those will cancel. The absolute 3 times the absolute value of x is negative 9. There's no negative over here. This is negative. That's no solution. Because what if this had been 3 minus 20 equals negative 19, right? Then when I got to this point, it would have been a positive 1, and that would have been okay. And I could have finished. So don't automatically, just because this is negative on this side, say no solution until you know for sure that the absolute value is going to equal a negative. Does that make sense? Kind of? Okay. So for this one, I have negative 13 because I'm subtracting from both sides. So those cancel. It's probably better when I use actual color, isn't it? Those cancel. Negative 5, negative 25. I have negatives on both sides. So when I divide by this negative 5 over here, those will cancel. And then I get the absolute value of x becomes a positive 5. So that's okay. So there is a solution. So you only want to say no solution when you know for a fact that that absolute value is going to end up being equal to some negative. And then there's no solution. Make sense?
So in that case, what if the absolute value of x is just 5?
Here?
If it was, yeah, because if it was negative 5.
No, but it'll still be negative 5 because if I do negative 5 times the absolute value of negative 5, it still becomes positive. Does that make sense? Yeah. I would like you guys to try these real quick.